I would venture a guess that most of you have heard of Oswald Chambers, the writer of My Utmost for His Highest, great devotional book. Some of you might think he was a wizened old sage, who lived many years, and in his wisdom he began to write down his thoughts for the preceding or surpassing generations. No, that wasn't quite the story. He was born to devout parents in Aberdeen, Scotland. He was raised to love Jesus. His family was very dedicated in the ministry. They moved in 1876 to Stoke-on-Trent in England, which I believe is where my mother's family is from. Anyway, his father had taken a position as a home missionary, missions evangelist for the North Staffordshire Baptist Association. I'll get these words right. And then they moved to Perth, Scotland, where his father became a pastor there. I preached in Perth, Scotland. And then finally to London in 1889, where Clarence was appointed traveling secretary of the Baptist Total Abstinence Association. And that's quite the association. So at 16, Oswald Chambers was baptized. He became a member of a church. He was very, very spiritual, much into learning and growing and in wisdom. And he was known for his deep spirituality. He participated in trying to reach the poor and the needy and evangelizing of the poor occupants of local council houses. At the same time, he also demonstrated gifts in both music and the arts, and he ended up pursuing the arts. He went to the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, where he pursued the arts, but he sat under the influence of a holiness preacher named Alexander White. And while in Edinburgh, he felt really called to ministry. And so he went to a little Bible college called the Dunoon College, just outside of Glasgow. And he was under the tutelage of Reverend Duncan McGregor. However, McGregor got injured in 1898, and Chambers was soon teaching lessons and basically took over the school, much of the administration of it. So anyway, skipping a lot, Oswald Chambers, he was involved in the holiness movement, and took him all over the world, really, to the U.S. and other places, and he got involved with charismatic Pentecostal type movement. There was some division over the whole doctrine of tongues, and he wasn't opposed to tongues, but he was opposed to people that made it as the sign of the baptism of the Holy Spirit, or the only must-have gift of the Holy Spirit. And in 1908, he was sailing to the U.S. when he kind of got acquainted more with this childhood friend named Gertrude Hobbs. He called her Biddy. And wasn't too long, in May 1910, those two got married. And they had a little girl afterwards, about a year later, named Kathleen. And so together, they were just partners in the gospel. And Biddy would be an incredible administrator. She had shorthand that she could do 250 words a minute. And she would just type shorthand all his teachings and sermon points and lessons and meditations, etc. So, in fact, if it wasn't for her, we probably wouldn't have My Utmost for His Highest. You'll see. So together they founded the Bible Training College in London, England, where Chambers would just welcome anybody and everybody who wanted to learn. It didn't matter what age they were. They could come in. Didn't matter if they could afford it or not. They could come in. In fact, they would welcome anybody who was in need. If they needed money, if they needed a winter overcoat, if they needed education, they would be welcomed there. He said he felt he was just to give the gospel away, which is a running theme, it seems, in these hero stories. Between 1911 and 1915, there was 106 resident Bible school students, and 40 of them became missionaries around the world. In 1915, a year after the outbreak of World War I, Chambers shut down the Bible school, and he volunteered and signed up to be a military chaplain with the YMCA. He was stationed in Cairo, Egypt, and he actually taught and ministered to Australian and New Zealand soldiers who ended up participating in the Battle of Gallipoli. which was made famous by a Mel Gibson film of the same name. He told a group of fellow YMC workers that he had decided to abandon concerts and movies for Bible classes, and they predicted the exodus of his soldiers. They will never go to him again. And what they hadn't considered, though, was that Chambers was a very dynamic speaker and engaging Bible teacher, and his gift just paved the way for him. And he had a little wooden framed hut, and soldiers would gather around, and he would teach them and train them. Hundreds of soldiers listening attentively to this man speaking on the topic of what good is prayer. Confronted by a soldier that said, "I can't stand religious people," Oswald Chambers said, "Neither can I." I love that. He was stricken with appendicitis on the 17th of October 1917, but he resisted going to a hospital, saying the beds were needed for wounded military. On October 29, a surgeon performed this emergency surgery, but Chambers died on November 15th, not too far from now, 1917, from a pulmonary hemorrhage. He was buried in Cairo with full military honors. Before he died, Chambers proofread a book that he wrote called, what is it now? Baffled to Fight Better. A great name. He borrowed the name from a poet, Robert Browning. For the remainder of her life, Gertrude Chambers, widow, transcribed under hard conditions and published books and articles edited from her 250 words a minute shorthand. Most successful was My Utmost for His Highest, which was produced in 1924 as a daily devotional comprised of 365 short little devotionals with great insight, great, incredible wisdom that you have to read over and over again to get the full impact. And that work has never been out of print and has been translated into 39 languages at last count. 24th of July, 1874 to 15th of November, 1917. Oswald Chambers was only 43 years when he died, when he graduated to heaven. A wise old sage of old, no, he was a young man. Great wisdom, great love for Jesus, such grace. He was a light that burned bright for Jesus in his generation. Let us be the same.